Several seats in the state legislature are up for grabs this November. With no incumbent in State House District 51, Erik Ho, Kukana Kama-Toth, and Lisa Marten will face off for the Kailua and Waimānalo seat. And over in the state Senate, it's a rematch from 4 years ago, as Sam Sloan tries to win back his old job from Stanley Chang in the East Honolulu district. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of election 2020 on NSIGHTS on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Tonight, a doubleheader for seats at the state legislature. The race for Senate District 9 pits incumbent Democrat Stanley Chang against the man he defeated 4 years ago, Republican Sam Sloan. But up first, House District 51 in Windward, Oʻahu, with no incumbent. This seat is open for the taking. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions. And you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to the candidates for State House District 51, which represent parts of Kailua and Waimānalo. All are appearing via the internet. Democrat Lisa Marten grew up in Kailua, attending public schools. She earned her master's degree in public policy, a doctorate in public health, and is the founder of the nonprofit Healthy Climate Communities. From the Aloha ʻāina Party, Erik Ho was born and raised in Waimānalo. Before graduating from Mānoa, he served in the U.S. Air Force as an aerospace maintenance journeyman. And Republican Kukana Kama-Toth is a Waimānalo resident who earned a degree in social work while raising 5 children. She serves on the Waimānalo Neighborhood Board and is a community advocate. Now, you're all first-time candidates. Thank you for being with us tonight. Let me ask what got you to decide to run for office. Let me start with Erik Ho, being from the Aloha ʻāina Party. Was that a big part of your motivation?
Not just that, but also that it was an open seat. Open seats are generally easier for anybody to put their name in and try to get some exposure for themselves and their platform that they have to offer to their community.
What was it that you think you bring to the seat?
As a private citizen, just having my own opinions as well as seeing what could be changed. I just want to effect some type of governing platform versus just playing politics.
Kukana Kama-Toth, Republican. How is it running as a Republican in Waimānalo, and what made you decide to run?
For me, it's who I am. I wouldn't label myself as such. I am a community advocate for the place that I call home, and it's been eye-opening for sure. And I really ran because I wanted to take my advocacy from the community level and take it to the state capacity.
And Lisa Marten, I'd like to give you a chance to answer the same question. What brought you into politics?
Well, I never thought I would go into politics, but I'm very interested in policy, right? I have a master's in public policy from Harvard, and I've studied public health as well. And I've just been engaged in legislation and work in a broad variety of sectors: environmental issues, health issues, community zoning issues, housing. And I'm always asking legislators and council members to vote a certain way. And I'm seeing if I can have my own vote for once.
Okay, there's so many things going on in this world. People are talking about how 2020 has just sort of sucked. We've got the pandemic, we've got the presidential election, we've got a lot of, tension between ethnic groups going on right now. What would you say that when you come to a place like Waimānalo and Kailua, what are the big issues, the big national and big local issues that are affecting and that voters are asking you about? Let me start with Kukana Kama-Toth on that question.
When I talk to community members, they're really looking at local issues. And Waimānalo and Kailua, they are from different spectrums of the socioeconomic status, And so in Waimānalo, we have the second largest Hawaiian homestead population on island. And their concerns is about accessibility. It's currently about being able to get food for themselves, having accessibility to their ocean, marine resources, as well as their health center. And then you go into Kailua, and it's a different kind of need, which is they're concerned about monster homes. They're really concerned about the Kauai Nui development, concerned about how their beaches are being commercialized, as well as having outsiders from their community being in their community to access the marine resources as well. And so there's just a whole bunch of different issues, but they're mostly local. They're mostly local issues.
Lisa Martin, what kind of issues are you most interested in dealing with, and what do you think your constituents need?
Well, as Kukana said, there is a range, but I actually feel there's a lot of overlap. I think both Kailua and Waimānalo have been overrun by tourism, not just in the business districts, but into the neighborhoods, into the public parks, et cetera. And so that's been a concern for both communities, and that's something I've been really engaged in for more than a decade. And the other issues, right now that people are worried about the schools. A lot of the students are taught by people who are not trained teachers because of our teacher shortage. At the moment, COVID is affecting people really differently. For some people, it doesn't have a big economic effect. For some people, it's devastating, but for everybody, it's very stressful and very restrictive. And that's something that I would really like to use my public health background on helping us get through, to be a little more aggressive than we've been on the prevention side and management side. And I just think it would be great to have a voice within the legislature that has that background to know what is possible, what can be done.
Okay, Erik, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about the issues that you think are most important in your folks' district. And I'm hearing from the others that it's a lot more diverse than many people think.
Oh, they're absolutely right. We do have a population that spans the spectrum of both ethnicities as well as income levels. So we have a lot of disparity between the communities. However, that doesn't mean that they're both coming apart. What we can do is increase, sorry about that, the DHHL waitlist. I want to take a look at that, and also the tourism and education opportunities for our Hawaiian population.
Let me ask you, Erik, do you feel like there's a history of activism in Waimānalo, and you're from the Aloha ʻāina party? Is that an important part of your campaign, that there needs to be more attention paid to the original population of the island?
It would be helpful because our population thrived here for thousands of years, and it seems as if that the political parties that have come in following the history of Hawaii. And I think if we bring Native Hawaiians back into the political sphere, they can have a positive impact with their generational knowledge that's been passed down and try to write the course of Hawaii's political chart.
Kukana Kama-Toth, how do you see the issues around Hawaiian ethnicity and the fight over the land playing out in your district?
Well, in politics, we aren't highly represented in politics, and so with 28,000 Native Hawaiians on the waiting list, I mean, right here, I'm a leasee here on the Hawaiian Homesteads of Waimānalo. And when I go across the street, those are Native Hawaiians that are living in tents on the side of the road. I've been a very strong advocate to find and champion solutions. And honestly, for the Native Hawaiian population, I don't understand the setbacks that the current administration has had to help house our people. We have all this land. We have over 200,000 acres of DHHL land, and we're constantly seeing it being leased out to individuals who are not Hawaiian, and if you look at the Hawaii Homestead Act, there's 3 different types of leases that were supposed to be given out to Native Hawaiians. One was for residential, one was for agricultural or ranching, and the other one was mercantile. The last time a mercantile lease was given out was I don't even know how long ago. We're talking decades. And so there really is, mean, a lot of people might think Native Hawaiians have all of these different services that are being provided from them for them. But honestly, I think there needs to be accountability. And that's why my commitment is to really actually work with departments of the DHHL, and the heads of DHHL to see what kind of solutions we can come up with. There's just, we talk about affordable housing, we talk about all of these different things that we want to do to bring solution to this housing crisis we're facing here in Hawaii.
Let me
But
let me have Lisa take on the affordable housing
go ahead.
thing. We just had quite a controversy in Kailua with proposed affordable housing projects. Some said affordable housing was badly needed. Others said that project didn't really fit. What is the demand, and what is your solution for affordable housing, particularly in your district?
Well, I think that we definitely need affordable housing. When I was young, people like myself, my peers, we all stayed in the garage units and the ʻāina units when we couldn't afford our own home yet. And those are all vacation rentals now, more than anything. And so that was the affordable housing. That was the housing that was for old people or single people or just people with low paying jobs. And if that's not the case, and just because our density has increased so much, there are people that have housing, but they are crammed in. It's one thing to multi-generational households can be a beautiful thing, but they can also, in some cases, just be too crowded and everybody's on top of each other, and they might thrive to have, opportunities to move out with their own young family.
Let me ask this question.
So,
Let me ask though.
yes.
Do you think,
So I think that having some more formal affordable housing units built, very much like the design of the one that was proposed, but on commercial property, on mixed use property, not going into residential areas where people bought their residential land with a certain set of expectations and rules, and then they're going to change that on them.
Okay,
and I think we do have opportunities. The state just changed the law about use of school land.
Lisa, I got to give everybody some time. We've only got about 20 minutes here, so let me make sure. Eric, on the housing issue, what do you think the solutions are for affordable housing?
I think some of the solutions are changing our zoning laws. If we stick to zoning our agricultural lands to those and not changing them over, it'll help to keep the property prices down. And also we need to keep our city councils in check. And by doing so, preventing them from overvaluing properties, which drive up the cost of living over here. So if we can address the root causes from that financial point of view, we should be able to help with the affordable housing issues.
So let me ask all three of you now. The other really big issue right now is the COVID crisis, and I'm wondering, for each of you, how do you feel about the way it's been handled? How do you feel about the opening and closing of businesses? Do you feel like this has been handled well, badly, and horribly, or somewhere in between? Let me start with Republican Kukana Kama-Toth.
Aloha. Honestly, we had a really awesome opportunity to get through this in a quicker way. Unfortunately, I guess the way that things have been, the way money has went and what our public was being told really wasn't what was happening. And so in my opinion, in my mana'o, I feel that people need to be held accountable. Our leadership needs to be held accountable. I'm not saying that hard work didn't go into the process, but I'm saying that people are hurting, small businesses are hurting, and there's money sitting there that our governor decided to veto instead of really looking at where that money could have went to kokua and help our small businesses and our people. Our unemployment, it's crazy. I mean, we've been functioning on a dinosaur system, and our legislators worked hard to put money in these certain places, and now it's in our governor's hands. And I just really think they're moving like sloths.
Let me ask, Lisa Marten, you have considerable public health credentials already. We've talked about that. I'd like to know, What do you think went wrong in the response from the state administration?
I think some things, first of all, some things have been done very well. Our treatment, our care has been excellent. Our hospitals have, set up great safety protocols, kept up with all the latest constantly changing treatment, and we've had a relatively low death rate because of that. On the prevention side, I think that we had an opportunity at our first shutdown, right? I had called earlier for restricting travel. And when that happened, it was good. It gave us, some time to get our prevention measures in place. And unfortunately, those were not scaled up. And I don't understand why. I'm not on the inside. But it seems like perhaps there was reticence to spend money, even though we had the funds. And that was the time before we had a big caseload to ramp up the personnel, ramp up all our systems and practice using it. Okay, even if our tests are negative, just get the systems, figure out how we do mass testing, how we do things regularly. And so we missed that opportunity to get our contact tracing workforce up and trained, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Erik, what's your response to the way things have been handled as far as the COVID crisis?
Well, hindsight's always 20/20. I don't have any experience in dealing with any of this. However, what we can do from this is take a look at all the actions and inactions of all officials from the county, state, and federal level and come up with a better action plan to address a pandemic such as this with a brand new coronavirus that we had no background information on before. And then what we can do is also try to include our legislative bodies in the emergency powers section, because currently only the governors and the mayors have the emergency powers. And if we include the legislature, it'll have the voice of the people having a guiding process to get us out of this pandemic.
Kukana Kama-Toth, you wanted to add something to that?
I do. I'm reading about accountability and transparency. Okay, and the biggest problem that I see, honestly, is that our sunshine law was put into, the governor limited our ability to access information to be able to really be in the know. Okay, and when they did implement the 14-day quarantine, they really didn't make sure that where these people were saying they were going, that they were really going there. So it's like we've had to. I don't know if you folks are aware of the Hawaii Kapu Breakers page, but it was them that's been kind of pushing these policies and these laws and helping them to create these necessary steps and actions, because it's not working, and so they've been getting better as we went on, but
yeah,
that it's been taking so long to do the right things. Okay, it's just really frustrating.
I've got a couple questions now, and they're kind of interesting. So one is, how do the candidates feel about the upcoming presidential election and the possibility of public unrest? And also, do you folks think that there's any legitimate fear of voter fraud? I'll start with you, Lisa.
Okay, so I feel like this is a really important national election. I feel like our president is not bound by rules in the same way that other presidents have been in the past. And if he were elected again, so he didn't have to worry about any constraints for, a future election, he would be even less bound by rules. So that to me is terrifying. In terms of riots and unrest, I do believe that here in Hawaii, that is not the way we function. When I was going and talking to community members, there were some people, when I asked them what their concerns were, they would tell me exactly what you were talking about. They would bring up riots and looting, and they would bring up problems with fraud, voting by mail. And I'm just thinking that is something that they are seeing on national news, and that is not something we're experiencing here, right? Our protests, if you call it that, for, we're beautiful paddle outs, they're peaceful. That is more our way. It's more respectful here. And then in terms of voting by mail, over 60% of people were already voting absentee. We have an excellent system set up.
Okay,
And that's
Lisa,
just not an issue.
Lisa, I gotta still move them along. Thank you very much. Kukana Kama-Toth, what do you, I'll give you a chance to respond because there's a little bit of partisanship there. So as a Republican, how do you defend the president, and do you have similar concerns about voter fraud?
You know, for me, I ran for office because I'm really involved in my state and local legislations, you know, and the president, I will support any president that is the president of America. You know, for me, the way that I feel about that shouldn't matter because any legislation and stuff is going to be run by the community that I represent because it's really what they think. And that's the decisions that I will have to be making my decision upon is the way that the people that I represent is wanting it to go. You know, I as a social worker, I really am able to take myself out of the situation and really see what's happening and then advocate for it and help to create solutions for it. I don't think we should be limited by the parties that we are affiliating ourselves with.
Okay.
You know, and I just, yeah, that's
Okay.
where I sit with all of this.
All right, Erik Ho, I mean, what do you think of that answer? I mean, as a person representing a brand new party, how do you feel about what's going on with the current two parties that are in power?
Oh, in 2016 and 2018, I thought about running for office, and it was going to be under a third party as well with those elections. And so with me, I think that it's part of the two-party system. People want to see change. Well, you're not going to get it with change from the same two parties that's been around since the U.S. Civil War. If you want any kind of change, I would suggest you try to vote third party for at least this term. And then in 2 years, because that's how long this office is, if you don't like what happens with the third parties, then just vote them out. I mean, it's just that simple.
Let me ask another question. This is kind of a fun question. For you folks who live in Waimānalo, you may have a neighbor soon named Barack Obama and his family. They're building quite a big mansion there along the shoreline. What do you folks think about what the Obamas are doing there? I mean, there's some controversy about seawalls and so on. Lisa Marten, how do you feel about it? You're the Democrat here. Is you welcome with open arms, or are you a little concerned about the process he's using to build his mansion?
I think that, for what I understand, it's the property is owned by his friend, but that he is planning to build a home on that, along with, I guess, another home by his friend. So I don't know that he's been directly involved in anything himself to this point, but I know that, you know, we have policies here in Hawaii. We are threatened, you know, climate change is here. It's not in something in the future. And we have sea level rise. And there's a lot of issues around hardening our shoreline. And they were able to get an exemption to protect a building, the existing house that was there, and then they tore that house down. So, you know, so that is a bit of a question. I actually, it's possible that Obama doesn't even know any of the details. I don't know to what extent he's been engaged, but I do think that it's not just, you know, because it's related to Obama. In general, we have to think of how we're going to move forward with our shoreline everywhere.
Okay, Kukana Kama-Toth, how do you feel about that in terms of the hardening of shorelines and the possibility of having to move away from the shoreline in order to accommodate the changes in our sea level?
Well, first of all,
about Mr. Obama, I'm curious
yeah.
about that.
First of all, you know, I'm very, I love my ʻāina. I love my home. You know, environment is really important, but we have to remember the people. All right, I do people, you know, also. And the community here in Waimānalo is very afraid of losing their accessibility to Pahonu. Pahonu is the turtle pond that's located fronting the estate, you know, and currently there are a lot of people who have been restoring that 15th century historical area, you know, and it's a real special place for the community members here in Waimānalo and those who also come and visit the area. And so this is actually a really huge deal to this community of Waimānalo, and if we are all familiar with how when he would function and go on the highways and stuff, Kailua would get locked down a lot. And so here in Waimānalo, these people really live a lifestyle that's connecting them to the ocean. And so it comes back down to accessibility. As far as the coastal line, yes, if you build anything seawall related, you're going to move sand into areas that it would not have been, and when you build, I'm sorry, when you build homes too close to the shore.
We've only got a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
so I want to give.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Erik, how do you respond to the questions that are raised by the construction of that mansion and the effect on the shoreline? And do you see people coming out eventually on that property like they did, say, for Sherwood Forest or some other place like that?
I think what this does is it sets a further bad precedent for others across the state who may come in from out of state, find a piece of property on the beach that they want, and slap on the rules that they used at Pahonu. And if we allow this to go on, yes, then we can see more of this happening. And I would like to not see that happening. This is a real head-up project. It doesn't have the backing of the community. The seawalls affect the beach line access, as well as the sand movements across the beach, as well as the iwi kukuna that was found there after the fact. But yeah.
What are your concerns about the climate change issue, particularly for Waimānalo, Erik?
Climate change issues, we're at sea level over here. We have a major highway that runs along portions of the affected areas. So we have concrete berms and stuff over there, but we're gonna have to take a real hard look at public right away, how we can determine what's best course of actions.
Okay, so I've only got about one sentence each from each of you on this question. Do you feel like it would be good to limit the number of tourists that come in here, particularly the tourists that come to Kailua, and how would you do it? Really, just 1 minute each, Lisa?
I do believe that as a state, not just, I don't think we'll have a toll road at Kailua in particular, but as a state, I think that we should go for a higher end niche tourist market. As many butts and seats as possible is not helping us. It's not good for our environment. It's not good for
Kukana,
the welfare.
I got to jump to
of our
Kukana
people.
Kama-Toth, about one sentence.
A better program to give them a more qualitative experience.
And not quantitative. Okay, Erik, last word, very short. Tourists.
Carrying capacity. We have to identify carrying capacity for each island. Once we hit that.
All right, well, thank you all you guys. Great job. I really appreciate it. We want to thank all of you, the candidates for State House 51, Republican Kukana Kama-Toth, Erik Ho from the Aloha ʻāina Party, and Democrat Lisa Marten. Up next, the two men vying for the seat representing State Senate District 9. But first, please enjoy this Hikino story from Kalani High School that first aired in 2017. We'll be right back.
"17-year-old Madison Lalika, a senior at Kalani High School, is sharing her love for the 60s by making her own retro tie-dye t-shirts. She discovered her passion for tie-dyeing in 2014, and a year later created her own website to sell her hippie-themed shirts.
This looks like DNA.
Well, my biggest inspiration is the Beatles, of course. They're my life. All of my shirts are named after them. And I listen to them all the time, and they're really for like peace and love. And I feel like my tie-dye shirts are a way I can spread that, as a way like someone can feel as if they're radiating peace and love and energy from the 60s if they're wearing one of my shirts.
Madison's business, Tie-Dye Thy Soul, is located in her family's backyard, but her shirts have traveled all across the world.
My customers are, well, basically everyone. And like I've sold to different places, like in California, Texas, and even like international. I've sold to Europe, like Australia. I've sold to different places in Asia. So just like everywhere. I think my shirts have traveled like different places of the world, more than I have.
Madison's independently owned business allows her to tie-dye whenever she wants, giving her plenty of time for friends, family, and schoolwork.
The benefits of running your own business is that you work on your own time. Like, I can choose whatever day of the week I want to tie-dye, or if I want to hang out with my friends, or we can do it together. Tie-dye was an outlet for hippies in the 60s to just be themselves, to like show their inner soul and their inner color like outside. And I like that. I like that tie-dye is also like, it's colorful and it's like unpredictable. Like, no two shirts are the same. You could do the same process, use the exact same colors, but it could come out completely different. So yeah, that's basically why I love tie-dyeing, and I love wearing it, and I love feeling like a hippie and like just looking and like radiating like a walking piece of art. Like, I just like feeling like that.
All of Madison's profits from her business have gone into purchasing tie-dye supplies and saving up for college. Although after Madison graduates in May, she intends to put her business on hold. She plans to pursue environmental sciences in California and hopes to someday open her own Tie-Dye Thy Soul store. This is Anya Carroll from Kalani High School for Hiki No.
Welcome back to our fully masked second half with the candidates running for State Senate 9, which covers several neighborhoods in East Honolulu, including Hawaii Kai, Aina, Kahala, and Diamond Head. Republican Sam Sloan is a graduate of UH Mānoa and LaSalle Law School. He served in the state Senate for 20 years and was nicknamed the Lone Ranger because for several of those years he was the only Republican in the Senate. Democratic incumbent Stanley Chang was born and raised in East Honolulu. He's a graduate of Iolani School and Harvard Law School. He won this seat 4 years ago, and before that, served on the Honolulu City Council. Now, right now, we are in a hyper-partisan environment, and this is one of the probably few races where we've got two candidates of repute, of electability, who are of the opposite parties in this state. Let me start with you, Sam Sloan. How do you run in a local race when you've got this huge controversy involving the president and voter fraud and all these other allegations?
Well, you run on the issues, and as the Democrats once said, all issues are local, and that's true. And so you have to look at what's been going on locally, what's been done, what's not been done, alternatives. I mean, I prided myself when I was in the Senate, every time I voted no, and I think I hold the NCAA record for that, I tried to have an alternative.
A basketball score record.
Yeah, and another way of doing it. So that's what you do. And in terms of the national race, it's not Trump or Biden, it's Sloan and Chang, and that's what we're doing. We want to be representative of the people in our districts, and there are a lot of local issues.
But Stanley Chang, as a Democrat running in a district that does have a lot of Republicans in it, do you find that the partisan issues, the national partisan issues, are an issue?
They are an issue. Our district is certainly affected by them, and there is a lot of concern about what's happening at the national level. But having knocked on 35,000 doors across the district, you really get a sense of what it is that bothers people, whether it's an abandoned vehicle on their street or a broken street light, or really the top issues in the district are homelessness and housing. And that's why we've focused so much of our time on housing and trying to ensure that Hawaii is a good place to live for every generation of people, including those who have yet to be born.
Sam, let me just stick on this subject, though,
Sure.
for a little bit. Do you find that in your district, being a Republican is an advantage?
It used to be. It's not as much an advantage as it was. I think the district has changed quite a bit, is continuing to change. We have a lot more people that are retired state employees, for example, and we have a lot of people that really weren't active in politics before. So it's a different situation, and you have to take that into consideration. And since our last contest between the two of us, it's been 4 years, and a lot of things have happened in 4 years. One thing I've noticed, though, and I think this is statewide, and that is 4 years ago, you had a hard time finding a Trump bumper sticker, a rally for Trump. And now we're printing list of the rallies. I'm going to be involved in a Vietnamese rally for Trump on October 10th, and people themselves, citizens, are putting these together. We had 1,000 people at Kahala Mall a couple weeks ago, and we have big rallies, and we have them overlapping because people are doing it. And if you drive along Kalanianiole Highway, you'll see something you never saw before. Big blue Trump Pence signs. Interesting that they're blue.
Do you see a resurgence of the Republicans because of the president right now?
I think we're in unusually polarized times right now. I am a proud Democrat. I do believe in the values of the Democratic Party, like a woman's right to choose. I believe in the science of climate change and the coronavirus pandemic. I believe that all people should be treated equally and equitably, no matter what religion or race or national origin or LGBT status. And that's why I'm proud to support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for the presidency and vice presidency of this country.
Do you see, though, this? I mean, I know former Senator Sloan was saying that, this is a local issue, it's local races, but is the presidential race and the things the president does and says, is it important to the people that are supporting you that you run against that?
National politics impact us in Hawaii, even though we may be 5,000 miles away from Washington. That's the reality. Now, for me, it's important to try to advance the priorities of the district, and that doesn't matter who is in Washington. So just recently we had the CARES Act. That was a bipartisan deal that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump negotiated, and I was strongly supported that, and I strongly support another version of that deal to come down sooner rather than later, because our constituents are really suffering because the federal government has been paralyzed.
Sam, I just have to ask you this last question
Sure.
on this subject is, and as an outright Trump supporter, how concerned are you about this talk about the election being illegitimate because of mail-in votes when Hawaii is going to be almost 100% mail-in votes? Do you believe, are you concerned at all that the president is trying to set up to basically claim the election as a fraud and then keep office against the law?
No, I'm not concerned about that at all. And you heard the National Republicans say that there will be an orderly process no matter what happens, and I believe that.
But he didn't say that.
But you go back to 2016. You didn't say it in 2016 either.
And that makes you feel better.
It doesn't make me feel better or for worse. What makes me feel better is I helped appoint the head of the Elections Commission here in Hawaii, Scotty Anderson, and he's very positive about the checks and balances they put in for our version of mail-in ballots. I was not a fan. I voted against mail-in ballots all along. First of all, I'm traditional, and I think it's our responsibility to show up on Election Day and vote. But he's assured me that things that have happened in other states where they have had problems, like New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Minnesota and so forth, these are real problems. But he assures me that they have taken steps to make sure that they don't occur here. So I defer to him in that case. That's not the issue here. The issue, we have plenty of local issues. They have not been solved. We've talked about affordable housing for 50 years. We've talked about reducing the cost of living for as long a period of time. We haven't done anything. And we've had a near unanimous monopoly of the Democrat Party. They've had plenty of time. They sure haven't had me standing in their way.
Senator Chag, you made housing a major part of your platform and your efforts in the state legislature during the last 4 years. Did you even make a dent after all of that? I mean, I don't think people feel like we've solved this problem.
Oh, we definitely haven't solved the problem, Daryl. But Daryl, we have to start somewhere. And I think what I've tried to do over the last 4 years is to search high and low for solutions from every jurisdiction, recognizing that we need all the help that we can get. We've also tried to listen very closely to what gets said in debates like the one over the recent Kailua affordable housing project. People don't want more traffic on the streets. They don't want wealthy overseas investors to snap up just towers of luxury condos. And that's why we've tailored a plan that's modeled on the Singapore public housing system, but even more so modeled on the feedback that we've gotten from thousands of people statewide to build high-density condo units for a low price of $300,000 on state-owned lands near the rail stations. These would be limited to Hawaii residents who own no other real property.
Right, we had a whole show on this, so let me just say, but your own party doesn't seem to have embraced that fully, and do you feel like your party really has a will to make decisions like converting parts of McKinley High School's campus to very high-rise buildings?
Well, this is a big issue. It did not arise overnight. It is not going to go away overnight. And certainly there hasn't been a consensus to date, but we got to start somewhere. And I feel confident that we have to do something at some point, using the crisis of the pandemic as an opportunity. We know that the demand for affordable housing is latent, is enormous. And I think that developing more housing in this sustainable model is going to be one of the great pillars for the economic recovery that will lead us out of this crisis.
Daryl, can I weigh in on this?
Sure, I was going to.
Yeah, I like Stanley and I like his energy and his attitude, but we must be talking to different people, because the people I talk to, they don't want to be put into a 60, 70, 80-story high-density apartment. Many of them don't believe the rail is going to get past Middle Street, particularly with the announcements that were made yesterday, which could result in another 3 or 4 years of delay, hundreds of millions of dollars and all that. When are the people going to say enough is enough? But patterning any kind of development after Singapore is risky at best. Singapore is not a good example. Singapore is a dictatorship. Singapore is an admittedly socialist country. And what Stanley never says in any of his meetings or anything else is the government, which controls the means of production in Singapore and controls the land, also controls who gets into the lottery. And they do it based on race. And if you're not the right race, you don't get in this area. And if you are not the right race, you don't get in this area. They never talk about that. The people I talk to don't want any race-based
Let me ask,
housing.
so I've heard many of your speeches in the past, and you have a good reputation as Senator No-No. What's yes for you when it comes to affordable housing?
Well, the people we should be listening to are the people in the industry. The only agreement that we really have is that it's a shortage of supply. And that's always been the case. Build more houses and people will occupy them. But what kind of houses? First of all...
And in Hawaii Kai.
Yeah. Well, in Hawaii Kai, but it's an island-wide, statewide problem that we have to deal with. And even though we are regional senators, we have to be cognizant of that. And Daryl, you know, because you've had so many candidates on, every candidate seems to have their own proposal for doing affordable housing. I would bet my house and my farm and everything else with Stanley right now that there's no way that he or any other Democrat or anyone else can guarantee, oh yeah, we're going to build you that house for $300,000. And people have different ideas for what affordable means. I've heard advertisements coming out of Kapolei where $635,000 is described as affordable. So what's the amount going to be? How we're going to do it?
Let me give Senator Chang a chance. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You want to respond to that? He said quite a few things about your proposal, about Singapore in particular. You're not from Singapore, I know. So.
Yeah. Well, we got to start somewhere, Daryl. And Singapore is far from a perfect place. But one thing that they do with their housing is they actually deliberately integrate it on the basis of race. Here in Hawaii, we don't have the same racial issues that Singapore does. We do have them, but they're different. And I don't think that would be the focus of our plan. The focus of our plan would be to say, well, we do agree that we need to build more housing. That's great. How should it look? By process of elimination, I think we can all agree that we don't want to be paving over 1,000 acres a year of agricultural or conservation land, which is what it would take to build suburban sprawl like we've been doing in the past. I've never heard anyone tell me, Stanley, what we really need are new luxury condo towers for wealthy overseas investors. We do need to focus on our local residents who would be owner occupants. We do need to focus on new and innovative construction mechanisms. In fact, a new housing project is going up for a price that would be close to $300,000 a unit today.
I do need to move along in subject matter now. The coronavirus crisis. Senator Chang, as a state senator, the state senate in particular has been particularly critical of Governor Ige's administration and their handling of this. What do you think went wrong? What do you think went right? And what do you think of the place we're in now, where things have been opened and then closed, and then opened and then closed and then opened again?
A lot has gone wrong and a lot has gone right, and we all know that. We didn't ramp up contact tracing fast enough. We haven't gotten the unemployment, the rent relief, the small business relief funding from the federal government out fast enough. We watched as OCCC had by far the largest cluster in the state of 500 infected patients. But we've also been able to do some good things as well. We do have the natural barrier of the Pacific Ocean preventing people from coming here. We are finally seeing some accountability with the replacement of the directors of the health and public safety departments. And we have been ramping up the contact tracing and the testing capabilities dramatically recently. Now, will it be enough? I would say we need to err on the side of caution. I think we need to reopen very carefully. We need to look at tourism, but only if we can assure that incoming arrivals are COVID negative. And we need to restrict large gatherings and people who don't wear masks into the foreseeable future.
Sam, your take on it?
Total lack of leadership from the city and the state. And the people that are commenting are people that have never been in business, particularly small business. As a small business person almost all my life, I can tell you that the small business people have suffered and they keep suffering again. More than 2,000 businesses are listed right now as having closed permanently. There'll be hundreds, if not thousands more. We've not done the right thing, and we've not done it by them. And Senator Chang mentioned the CARES Act. We haven't even spent the money. The money is languishing there. We have not helped people that need the help. And then we pick on people like bar owners and so forth who have had zero problems in terms of spreading the virus. And we tell them, well, another 2 months, another 3 months. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to pay your employees?
Well, Sam, let me just interrupt you for a second. I mean, there were problems of spreads in bars. Maybe not scientifically to the point where you could say
but we
that's
didn't
a major
identify
thing.
the people that were doing it. We didn't identify the right people, and we penalized all people, particularly small business people.
What do you think overall of the mask requirements?
I'm sorry, was it?
Masks. Do you support the statewide masking?
I support people's choice. If they want to wear a mask, they should. There's been conflicting scientific and medical evidence about how effective they are, what kind of masks they should be. I mean, because we have people advertising, get your social mask today, and they make it a social thing rather than a medical thing. But my main concern is the not knowing. Business can't survive that way. That's what affects the stock market. It's the not knowing or the changes or not having a plan, not having rules, changing it, and so forth. When the plan came out that only one person could go to the beach or could go hiking, how ridiculous. So I don't see the good things that Senator Chang is talking about. We've kept people out, but we've destroyed our economy.
I'll give you a chance to respond to what he said.
Like I said, Daryl, I think we need to err on the side of caution. We've heard a chorus of scientific voices from around the world on the benefits of mask wearing. And how do we know it works? Because it worked here. It worked here in April and May. It is working right now as we speak with the restrictions that were placed on the community. You know, the real answer, you're right, is not opening and closing and reopening. The real answer is to conquer the virus, to prevent the community spread of the virus to an extent where, like in many other countries around the world, whether it's Korea or China or Japan, they are presumably are pretty much living their normal lives right now because they were able to control the spread of the virus through mask wearing.
Let me ask this other question. The ethnic tensions that have gone across the country haven't been as bad here. Although there are allegations of systemic racism in Honolulu in the policing. A question from a viewer, Nicole from Kahala. Do you agree or disagree with the need for justice system reform, especially as it relates to criminalization of the poor and mentally ill? Senator Sloan, or former Senator Sloan, you want to take that first?
When I was in the Senate, I served on committees and panels for judicial reform. I support meaningful and effective reform, but I don't support defunding the police. I'm not anti-police. I'm strong law enforcement. And the problem is we've made them into something that they're not supposed to be. We brag about they've issued 55,000 citations for violations of mask wearing or congregating, and we want to hire more police to do more of that, have more tickets for violations of these 13 rules that so far the governor has indicated. I think that's wrong. I support reform. We can always make things better. Also, the process of choosing the police commission and giving them their independence and powers.
Let me just follow up, though. When most people talk about criminal justice reform, they talk about having less people in prison. Do you feel like we put too many people in jail, and especially when they?
Well, let's have the people commit less crimes, and then don't put them in prison. If they don't commit the crimes, they don't belong in prison. And occasionally mistakes are made. We have private and public organizations that do a good job of research, and they've released people that shouldn't be there. That's where our emphasis should be, that we make zero mistakes. But do we need the police? Yes. Do we need them arresting people that are committing crimes? It's very interesting. Some of the people that are calling for defunding the police are the very first ones to call against people that they don't like, call the police to have them arrested or have them silenced.
Your feelings on criminal justice reform, Senator Chang?
Well, let's take a look at a concrete example, OCCC. 68% of OCCC have never been convicted of any crime. They are there because they are too poor to afford the cash bail. A further 700 people a year at OCCC are suffering from severe mental illness. As you can imagine, an overcrowded jail is just about the worst place for someone to recover from a mental illness. The reality is that these conditions created 500 cases, including almost 100 staff members getting COVID-19, and that's not a good environment. We should be focusing the entire system on a totally different approach. If someone is having a mental health crisis, people who are trained with military equipment and to deal with violent crime should not be our first responders. We need to recognize that issues like substance use, like schizophrenia, are public health issues. They're not issues for, the use of force.
Let me give each of you a chance to tell me, what is the issue, and we've talked a lot about big picture issues. What is the issue that most constituents in your district are coming to you and saying, you need to fix this first? What's the first thing?
Well, right now, obviously, it's the pandemic. We get calls from people on a daily basis who haven't received a dime of unemployment since May, April, even March. We hear from landlords who can't collect the rent and therefore can't make their ends meet. We hear from tenants who can't pay the rent because they have no unemployment insurance coming in. Underlying all of this, in my opinion, is the economic insecurity created by the skyrocketing cost of housing. It's not a new issue. It's an issue that's been here with us for a long time. But until we solve that issue, I don't think that we as a community are ever going to achieve a successful, thriving community. We're just going to become a place for the extremely wealthy and for their servants.
An awful lot of the housing in your district is for pretty well-off people now. And is that what you are hearing from the people you talk to? Is that the number one issue they want to address?
Pandemic, number one, just like Senator Chang, no question about it. Homelessness, the intrusion of homeless, when they weren't in Hawaii Kai, it wasn't a big issue. But they've been in Hawaii Kai for quite some time, and they've spread. And in the legislature, we've treated the homeless as a special class of people. We've given them hundreds of millions of dollars. We've exempted them from rules and laws that other people have to obey. And it's been a real problem in that respect. In terms of the housing problem, I started to say earlier, we should be listening to the people in the industry. We should be reforming the permit process, the zoning process, the way that we build houses, the way that we do things creatively. We're still trying to do the same things on the same model of 50, 75 years ago, and that doesn't.
Let me follow up though. When you
Yeah.
talk about homeless as being the big issue that you hear from, what would you do about those people?
Well, you can't treat them as a monolithic group, the homeless. You have to separate people that need medical attention, that need mental attention. I'm happy that they've made some progress in the area of veterans' rights, because they should be the first priority. But that's the first thing you have to do. And then you have to realize there are people, they will not go into shelters, they will not abide by any rules, they will not listen to anybody. What do you do about them?
You got about 20 seconds to talk about homeless.
We need more housing. No, we need more facilities and services to deal with homelessness. We need more housing first. We need more mental health services. We need more affordable housing for everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us tonight, and we thank our guests, the candidates for State Senate District 9, Republican Sam Sloan and Democrat Stanley Chang. Next week on Insights, 3 seats are up for grabs at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We'll hear from the 6 candidates hoping to be elected as trustees. Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.